John and Joanne to you. Although, Joanne, I know you're the worship animator at Hillhurst United, and perhaps you can fill in a few more details about your role after I've introduced John, or perhaps when the webinar is in progress. John is originally from Ontario, and actually I just found out that he grew up and was part of the East Plains United Church congregation in Burlington, where I'm currently at. So that's been a neat connection for he and I to have. John has served in rural and urban congregations in Alberta and at the United Way and area of Calgary. He went to school at Queen's, U of T, Princeton, and Chicago seminaries. John has worked with a team of people to allow an emerging church to come to birth. He is married to Anna and has 4 children, 20 years to 16 months. So welcome very much to you, John and Joanne, and we look forward to the presentation you've prepared for us today.
Okay, so I would just want to introduce Joanne. Joanne and I have known each other for almost 20 years, probably, in 2 different congregations, a large suburban church in Calgary, and then when I worked at United Way, and then now has come on staff here. A lot of the thinking of moving this community from sort of a near-death experience to certainly full and alive has been the gift and skill of Joanne. She brings good thinking. She brings experience in a large evangelical church in Calgary, the largest church in the city, but also a passion for social justice, and that passion for justice and good, strong, liberal, progressive thinking to our worship space. So she's been a great team person for me in my thinking and the work and life of this church. So it seemed appropriate that we have Joanne in on this conversation for sure, because worship is her passion and helping that to come alive. So what we did yesterday is we sat down and put together sort of a bit of a process, some of our collective thinking, and then some very concrete examples of showing you what we do. So part of it begins with sort of an introduction on some thoughts as we introduce you to this. You see the picture to your left. This church, when I got here, I know this to be true because they told me there were 38 people here, very small, in a trendy area in the city, but was really choosing life or death. And I'll speak more about this next week when we talk about leadership, but one of the things I would say is that they were literally at that place. This is our last chance to make a go or not. And that's really important if churches are aware that it's do or die. And so their willingness to engage and move forward in some sort of tough decisions about who they are means a lot. So Joanne and I will share some of the conversation as we go. Either one of us could speak from what's here, so we'll try not to, we'll get you used to 2 voices so you don't get bored of one. So one of the things I would say is I've been here 6.5 years. It was a small church, but in a very trendy neighborhood, wanting to go somewhere. We're here not to tell you what to do at all. Each church has its own identity, its own personality, its own raison d'etre. What we're hoping to do is share something about what we did, and hopefully it will tweak something about what you might do if you're seeking to grow your particular community. What we've discovered, not necessarily is anything brand new or snazzy or unique, but what worked in this context. So we're not here as the experts, but to just share some of our learning. One of the things we would say at the beginning is you're welcome to type any, to stop or question as we go along, but we'll sort of move through this. One of the things we realize is it's really important for churches to think about the neighborhood in which they serve. What's going on? Who's around you? What are the possible connections? We'll be talking about more about that when we talk about culture in 2 weeks' time. But this neighborhood has lots of coffee shops, pubs. It's sort of, if there's such a thing in Calgary, an artistic neighborhood, this might be it. It's a place where people come to shop.
Ontario.
I'm from Ontario. People come to walk around and be engaged in the neighborhood. I remember being here on a Sunday early in my first year, looking out across the street, and there was this trendy cafe restaurant. There was a lineup to get in, and I was sort of thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if people were kind of lined up to come into the church? What is it about brunch that is so great? And so there was sort of that in the back of my mind, thinking about the neighborhood, and there were lots of people coming to do lots of things, but not coming to church.
I think the important thing about that is that at the very foundation of our thinking about worship is it's not about the people who are sitting in the pews. It's about the people who are outside the doors that we can connect to in some way and make them feel comfortable with us in our community. So lots of churches will think, well, this person wants this, the committee says we need to do this, and they think about the people who are sitting there. And sometimes these churches are in the midst of communities that don't look like the church. There's multicultural areas in Calgary where the United Church is, everybody inside the United Church is Caucasian. And so there's some kind of disconnect between the church and the community at large. So first and foremost is that idea. It's not about you. It's about the people who aren't there. That's the beginning.
It's really important to get that, because there are churches in this city, as Joanne say, a church in this city is a very multicultural neighborhood, does not connect in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I interviewed at that church 6 to 7 years ago, and I said, you could do amazing things here. They said, thanks very much, and they didn't pursue it at all, but they still are not engaged in a very multicultural neighborhood. So churches, I think, in our cities and our presbyteries should have a unique identity and do a particular ministry. So people will show up at our church and they'll be looking for a traditional choir, and I'll say, well, that's not us. You might want to go down the street to Knox United Church, as an example. So figuring out who we are and what we do, we'll talk about this next week, about our values, really makes sense as we sort of address those in the neighborhood and some of the people who are among us. So these are some words that we want to talk about as we move forward here, as we go. One of the things that I would say is that we tried very hard and continue to make this church accessible to anybody who comes. We are very intentional. That's a key word. Intentional about everything that happens. There's a reason for what we sing, what we say, how we dress, etc., etc. As Joanne would say, there's no training required. In other words, we are not trying to form people into the United Church of Canada. We, in this community now, have a third that come from another denomination. So they might be Catholic or evangelical or Presbyterian. A third are what I would call United Church, and a third have no church experience. That is, they come with no church experience. When I say that that's the case, I think of a woman who came to our church. Her name is Stephanie. I knew her from another leadership program, and this is a story sort of symbolic of what I'm trying to say. She came into the church, sat down in the back seat with a Starbucks cup in her hand. She was clutching it. She saw me. She called me over. I went and said, hi, welcome to our church. She said, I've never been to church before. I've never been to a baptism, wedding, funeral, or Sunday morning. What do I need to know? And I think about her every Sunday. What do I need to know? How are we communicating that you, who may have no church experience or knowledge or experience, can feel welcome and part of this community? So that's really key to think about that, there's no secret handshake, there's no particular way you need to fit in and be like us. It's really about the church being connected and part of the community that gathers.
I think the important thing about knowing that it's accessible to all people is that if you were a church person, you've been in church all your life, you learned very young what it was. I've been in lots of churches that are really stuck on words, so they have big prayers, responsive prayers, pastoral prayers. They have times that they stand up and sit down. All those things you learn as you're in a congregation. But the person off the street has no clue. It was like me, my husband is Catholic, and the first time I went to Mass, I didn't know when, what to say, and everybody knew everything, and you feel very much like an outsider. So we're trying very hard to make that not part of our congregation where you have to learn. So the other thing is that we've shifted from literate culture and thinking about people who are concerned about theology and ideas and arguments, which is a very modern way of looking at it, to digital culture, which is interested in story and in connection, and not so much in creeds, but in transformation. And so digital culture does not care what you believe specifically. They want to be moved by what you say. And so understanding that our worship is not to present ideas to people, but rather to have experiences of the holy and the other, shapes what we put in our service and how we do things. So words are minimal in our service. I can just show you in just...
Don't go there just yet.
Okay, but we have just one prayer, and it's like 3 lines long that people would read. Interestingly enough, if you have a screen, and lots of people will say, I'm going to get a screen that'll make us modern, and then they take their bulletin that's 5 pages long and they just put it on the screen. That is not an effective use of the screen. It's good for words, for songs, so people can sing. It's good for images, but it's really painting worship. It's not just being another bulletin. And so I would encourage you, if you have a screen, not to think that that's going to make you modern. What makes you contemporary is who you're ministering to and how you use that screen to paint your service, not to put up lots of words.
Yeah. I want to sort of invite us to you to walk through our doors, if you will, on a Sunday morning. So one of the things that's really important as a sign of hospitality, which is one of the values of our church, is coffee. And so when you enter into our building, immediately there is hot coffee on in real urns with real mugs, and that invitation is part of our welcome to people on Sunday morning. That coffee is part of worship throughout. I jokingly sort of call it one of our sacraments. That is, that it's a way of saying you're welcome here. Coffee makes people feel, if you're non-church, that this is okay, it's normal. Oh, they actually drink coffee. They're like me in some ways. And when I first got here, we didn't have that. And what I discovered was that there was a core group of people who had coffee before church in the kitchen by themselves. And they weren't particularly interested in the other people who were coming. And so when we expanded that to everybody gets coffee in the sanctuary as a community, we thought at first there might be people who were against this idea, but certainly there weren't. Everybody thought it was part of what we do to show that hospitality.
The interesting thing about having coffee in the sanctuary is it made people connect with each other more before the service. And when I first got here, we had an organist who used to play a prelude and a postlude. And he came to me one day and he said, I just really don't feel like that prelude fits what's happening here. And he said, like everybody's jabbering and talking and it feels really loose, and then I come in and I play this really formal prelude. It doesn't fit. So we decided, with his blessing, to make the music before the service recorded music from the radio. So all those great CDs that you can buy at Starbucks that have music of the generation, that's the kind of music that we play before the service. So it actually does have kind of a coffee shop feel to the place as the service is starting, and we welcome that. The energy that you gain from that at the start of the service really propels you into a different space than a prelude does. So there were a few people who really missed that I like to come to church and prepare myself for worship sense, and we encouraged them to go into different places in the church that were more quiet. But in the sanctuary, there's a buzz from the moment people start walking in because of the music, because of the coffee, because of the feel of that casual invitation.
So it's not quite loud, but sometimes loud. In other words, when you walk into the sanctuary, you're not walking to a quiet place, you whisper. you're walking into lots of noise, lots of energy, and permission given to greet people, chew the fat, listen to the music. So that started you come in through the doors, and there's obviously the smell of coffee. There's an invitation by the greeter to get your coffee. There's cultural music, not church music, playing. Then we moved right to what you would call announcements. We got into a community situation as a church where it was either the minister doing the announcements or a long line of people who wanted to tell you the 15,000 great things they were doing. We set up what's called a news team. That is, that they vet all the announcements and speak. And we strategically pick a young person to do that, so that we have a woman who's probably late 20s who does that, gives us the sense of, oh, this is a young community. There's a young person up front. So they sort of introduce people, not going through the long list of announcements, but just highlighting, because your website and your bulletin should give them all the information they need. Often announcements are dead killers in churches. They're long, boring, and not done very well. So we try to do a short and snappy kind of highlights.
And the other thing is, it's at the beginning, because it used to be the order service, right around the offering, you'd have all the announcements. The most important thing, I noticed the comment there about the art of worship. And that, I think, is really key, not just in the elements and what you use, but in the flow. So what you don't want to do is set up a worship service that has stops and starts. So you start, you sing some songs, you have a prayer, you have a children's time, and you've already gotten into the message, and then you stop and you give announcements. And it just takes all the momentum you've built from the first part of the service and cuts it down. Then you got to start again. So be very aware of the ebb and flow of your service and the mood that it flows nicely from one place to another. There's another reason why we don't have the offering at the end, even though theologically it makes sense. In terms of flow of worship, the message is done and everybody feels like it's over, and then you're having prayers and offering. It's just the flow is interrupted in my opinion anyway. So we finish with the message and a hymn and have the offering in a different spot. Flow, really important.
And that flow is key. You might look back at a bulletin in the 1950s. In some ways, that's what it is. It ends with the sermon. Hopefully, that's the high point in quotation marks, or high energy, and then a hymn. A lot of churches, that energy gets sucked out partway through. I just want people to respond. Benita said, cultural music, instrumental, contemporary, or actual words on the radio type of music. That's a question for you.
Okay, well, the music that we play beforehand is actual music from the radio. And so I will often try and fit it with the theme. For instance, when we had a theme about loving yourself, and I chose Lady Gaga's Born This Way and played that before the service once, and I played Katy Perry's You're a Firework. But other times I will just we have some instrumental music, which is contemporary, and I will play that. There was a great CD that was called Northern Lights from Starbucks, which had Canadian music, and I played it. It's more the feel of the music. And the other thing is that we believe that there's sacred everywhere. So the stuff from the radio, it's not like a gimmick, like, oh, wow, we're so hip. It's because that's the stories in people's lives. And in particular in the digital culture, they won't talk about books they've read. They talk about movies they've seen, songs they know, websites they visit. So there is a lot of music which is not, sacred, that really connects with people. And that's the kind of music for before the service that we try to incorporate.
It's really important that we get that people walking through the door, whether they've been in the church or not, assess very quickly before things even start what kind of place this is going to be. So it happens before worship starts. I usually begin by quoting, and we'll talk about this in the next couple of weeks, the banner outside of our church. We were celebrating our 100 years in the church, and one of the people said, well, let's get a sign that says 100 years anniversary. And I said, no, let's just the past. Let's talk about the future. And we put together a big, huge banner that's in the front of the church outside that says, whoever you are, wherever you're at, join us on the journey. So every time we gather, I welcome people. I say, whoever you are, wherever you're at, we welcome you. Whether you've been here 100 years or 100 seconds, you're a part of us. And then I name the values that this community live by, that are named by the community: radical hospitality, and I point out the invitation to coffee. You're sitting beside people, hopefully you connect. Spirituality, which is our education and opportunities to learn, and social justice. That is, we're going to try to do something about what we believe. I'll say that 80% of our church could at least name 2 out of 3 of the values.
For sure.
And it's really important that the people there who come more than once or twice know what we value here. So if that doesn't fit with what you want, people won't come back. But a lot of times people, it's broad and accessible and actually visible, those values. And we'll talk about that next week.
I think what's interesting about the values is when we put the banner up, I wouldn't say this church lived those values or actually believed whoever you are, wherever you're at, join us on the journey. It was an aspiration, that banner was. But it sunk into the sort of the life of the community to such an extent that people started believing that's what they were about and started acting that way. We had a guy here the other day. He came in late. It was our affirming weekend, and he came in late on a Saturday, and I happened to be here. And he was living on the street, and he was an alcoholic. And he came in and he said, you know what, I just feel like I need some help. And I go, what kind of help do you need? Because we do have visitors from time to time who are looking for bus tickets or what. I just need some help. I'm on the wrong path, and I just need to get back to church. And funnily enough, he told us in his backpack he had like 10 beers there. And I had a friend with me who was very astute. She said, well, you know what? If you want to come back to church tomorrow, which he was really interested in, why don't you leave your backpack here? Can you just drink 2 beers tonight? And we'll keep the rest here, and you come back tomorrow and get it. And that's exactly what happened. It was our affirming weekend, and he came back the next day. And I was concerned because I thought, well, I welcomed him back, and what are people going to treat him like? And he comes in the door, and a guy from our congregation, unprompted, took him under his wing, sat with him, took his information, invited him to take a shower. And he, invited him to lunch. I gave him his backpack back, and he came back later that afternoon with flowers. And he said to us, you guys are so great. These flowers are for you. I found them in a dumpster. And I was just so moved because I thought, I was concerned our community couldn't live out their mission or their beliefs, and they did. And just one more quick story. We're an affirming congregation, and we're starting to get a reputation in the city that this is a safe place for people from the LGBT community to come. And so there's one woman in our congregation who was an evangelical and married, and she got divorced and came out as gay, and all her friends left her, and she was in a space of really feeling like there wasn't a church for her. And one of the people who works here, who happens to be gay, saw her, gave her her card, so she came to our church and has been part of our congregation. Tough times, not tough times. She said to me the other day, this is the only place I've really experienced unconditional love. Every place else, every church I've been before has always had, you can't be gay, you have to dress the right way, you have to do this. But that unconditional love, this is the place I've experienced it. And that, what I'm trying to say is, that wasn't how it started. But naming that over and over, week after week, the people in the pews came to expect, that's how I live my life. So it's really important in your worship that you reinforce those values that you want your community to live by.
And I would say being able to name it in a way that's not church language, I think is really helpful, because you don't have a sign up front that says something about God's love, particularly. It might, I think people expect the church to say that, but just come whoever you are, wherever you're at, just sort of is an open invitation. We got to move on. What kind of card are you giving out? A welcome card, a business card? We don't give out cards, so I'm not.
We all have business cards, so we can meet people. We have a bookmark, actually, that we gave out at Christmas time and give out when people come in sometimes, and it has that whoever you are, wherever you're at, join us on the journey on one side, and Hillhurst United Church on the other side. So we do have some things that we give out from time to time. When we march in the Pride Parade, and actually one member of our congregation came to our church because he got a button at the Pride Parade. So we're not constantly giving things out, but we are aware of marketing opportunities outside of the people in the pews, and when we have an opportunity, we share those things.
Okay, now we got to get a bit concrete, because you're wondering what this has to do with worship. It has everything to do with worship, because it's about who you are as you come and gather. We sort of done the coffee, we do the announcements. One of the things that we would say is that our worship is sort of liturgically loose. That is, there's an order that a Catholic person might see, an order to what we do, but an evangelical might say, well, it's not too stiff feeling. There's very few words expected. We don't do responsive back and forth kinds of things. There's usually only one biblical text as far as scripture reading that we work with. Joanne mentioned already the difference between digital and literate culture. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, it's just I put up a slide, and it's probably really hard for you to see, but you'll see our order is on the left-hand side. This was our Easter bulletin, and so we don't use the United Church bulletins. We have a marketing person here who communications and marketing, who does a bulletin cover every week. So we'll show you some of them. But this is we finish the story was the theme of the day. You know, like Christ is risen, but we need to be risen too. We finish the story. It didn't end with that resurrection. So that's what the cover was. And on the other side, you'll see our service. The whole service fits in that one little box there. And there's a short prayer, which is right at the front, and that's it. There's songs, and there's an order. We have talked about going completely green, but the congregation really enjoys the bulletin. They want to see what comes next. So we also put announcements in the bulletin. On the other side, you'll see somewhere we have announcements of programs here, key things in the community. We call it the happenings, and every week people read that too. So this is an 11 by 17 document that we have. Bulletin cover on the front, order of service in, and then 2 pages of kind of announcements. And that's how we do that. But again, words are for literate culture, which is probably boomer and earlier. Digital culture, story, video, websites, oral tradition, really more than anything else. So we've tried to transition more into that way of doing worship.
You could actually sit in our worship without a bulletin and be quite fine.
Yeah.
And I see people there that they're not looking in a bulletin. Even if you give them one, they're not really, they don't really look at it. And so that's kind of the intent, that there will be people there who will just be sitting and waiting and participating as they like. So as we think about worship, we do have a traditional kind of worship committee. We'll say more about that later, perhaps. But what we try to think about, Joanne and I in particular, think about occasionally we will use the lectionary. Usually if I got nothing, if I'm not feeling particularly excited or interested, we'll fall back to the lectionary. But I'd say we work more on series. So in the past, and you can check our website and look at some of these. For example, we did the 7 deadly sins over a number of weeks, probably 7 weeks. We did God's top 10, or the 10 commandments, not over 10 weeks, but probably over 6 or so. Sometimes we do books that are popular. So when The Shack was important, it's really interesting. I said, everybody kept going out the door, or once a week somebody would say to me, have you read The Shack? I'd say, no. Have you read The Shack? No. Finally I said, I got to read this stupid book. So I read The Shack and announced that we were going to talk about it, and we had a good attendance. And then I just said, well, let's get together tomorrow night and we'll talk about this again, about another 20 people interested in talking about that bridge to culture. We try to say, what are people outside the church talking about? And what are people thinking about? Interestingly enough, so last week was a good example. Our secretary, who just met Marsha a minute ago, she looked at the top 10 books and nonfiction books being read in Calgary, and there were 3 of the 10 who had religious, in quotation marks, themes or opportunities for us to connect with. So there's lots going on, whether it was Eat, Pray, Love, or The Shack. There's lots of books out there that people are reading that we need to be speaking about in our sanctuary and worship. Another example of that would be, we do the Real Theology, REEL theology. So we take during Lent the 5 or 6 of the top Academy Award movies and use that movie as the life text and then link it with the biblical text. People love that. The things that they're watching in movies is talked about on a Sunday. They use it as a bridge to share it. So people will say, they'll email their friends saying, oh, we went to the movie Help, our church talked about it on Sunday, check it out. So it's a soft form of evangelism, this connection to culture. But we really, really, really try. Both Joanne and I are Myers-Briggs Ps. We like to, we're last-minute thinkers on what's going on and try to address what's going on in the culture right now on the Sunday.
This slide here was for the 7 deadly sins. You can probably figure that out by looking at it. One thing we don't stay away from is provocative things in our church. So we want to make sure that when you're in our church, you're the same person as you are outside. So if we're talking about addictions, we'll speak about, alcohol, drugs, sex addictions, whatever, because it's real life. It's not fake life. The church is not the place where you sanitize everything. The church is the place where you come to have your world explained. So these images are, maybe more provocative than they would have shown in the 50s, but they seem to speak to our culture. They're images that you can sort of connect with. So that's why this was the slide for the 7 deadly sins. And then we also had a day when we were talking about marketing our faith or evangelism, which we called marketing our faith. So this is the bulletin cover that our communications person put together for that. And she has tracks from like the 50s, all these sort of Christian marketing things that kind of, make you wonder whether you'd ever want to be a part of that community. But again, it was sort of a provocative way of saying, is that what we are? Is there a different way we can talk about faith where people aren't going to be turned off or feel confronted? So again, that whole worship marketing right from the very beginning, you get that bulletin that feeds into the theme of the day. Very important, theme versus lectionary. And themes we try to have that connect with the person and with the culture they're living in.
Those bulletin covers is really important. I don't get the United Church one right now. Maybe they're excellent, I'm not sure. But generally they were pictures of peaceful scenes somewhere, a church or a pond or a butterfly or something. All those are all fine. These are ones that are engaging. They're ones that people wouldn't feel they got to hide because they went to church. So they're things that are very provocative, and they're very thoughtful and well done. The communications I'll talk about next week or the week after, but we do have somebody on staff who's 20 hours a week, 25 hours in communications. So that's a key piece of, I think, an emerging church. I don't want to say too much more about that, but
I just wanted, if you'll notice on this bulletin on the back, there's a course called Religious Refugees. As people come into your church at worship, you need to be aware of who's there, right? Like John said earlier, they're not all United Church in our community. We have quite a number of people who come from conservative traditions, and we're a progressive United Church. So when John preaches or other people speak, they often say things that people from conservative Christian communities don't understand, don't get, or are horrified by in some situations. But they like the community and they feel, the transforming spirit. So they stay with us. And so we had a 3-part course called Religious Refugees for those people who didn't have a spiritual home anymore. Those people came to worship first. It wasn't like we had the course and then those people came to the course. They were in worship. Be aware of who you are and how things outside of your worship service can dovetail and meet the needs of those people who might be in your congregation that aren't United Church people. So,
again, it kind of links to what we'll talk about another time. But that sense of we tried not to be at war with the culture, or some churches talk about the culture as though it's a bad place, or, the church has arrived and the culture hasn't quite caught up, or we're the faithful remnant. We don't have that I think that's kind of arrogant to think of it that way. There's lots of excellent things happening in culture that we need to honor, respect, and build bridges to, and help people see how some of those things are actually very faithful. And so one of the things Joanne has helped me sort of name is that we're not at war with culture. Something you may disagree with that, but I think that we have to think about what's going on where people spend most of their lives, and how do we help them see that what they're doing is valuable, faithful, or needs to challenge the culture. Not to say that we all just walk along with the culture.
An important part of that is we always say we're not building a church here. We're building a community of faith. And I like that comment about Gray Street being a place to find community, because that's why people are in the church. They're in the church because there's people that they can share their lives with. There are people who just want to come on Sunday morning, get filled up, is what they would say, and then go. But generally speaking, the further along we've gotten, the more people want to be engaged in some way with other people, with the community, with the message, with the mission. It's still hard. It's not like there's volunteers coming out of the rafters because people are busy. But certain things they really want to be involved with. They want to be in the community. They want to feel a part when they come in, and that's what they'll say. I really feel like I'm welcome here. So important. If you're trying to build a church, that's a different thing in my mind. Community, that's what people gravitate to.
So the community piece is really important, as well as a place where they're invited to question, that they're invited to share their questions, and invited to engage with people about. There'll be a chunk of people there every week who would call themselves atheists, and they feel quite welcome in our community. We're sort of moving through this sort of music is key, although I would be surprised if anybody came to our church saying, I'm really here to listen to your choir. That is, they're not an exceptional group of people. There's probably 25 people in it, but they're there because of the community that surrounds them around music and what they provide. But one of the things we do once a month, I was aware of this as I came to this church, that cultural music is really important. And so once a month we have what's a small group of guys, 3 to 5, who come, and they've come for a few years now, once a month, and we do cultural music as sort of life text, if you will. We'll have a theme. They'll find music that fits the theme, and we intersperse throughout the worship service, which we'll show you in a sec, sort of a cultural song, and then how it connects to the biblical text or the theme we're talking about, and another cultural song. And the cultural music is sort of like coffee house style of worship, where it's not a sermon, but maybe 3 short 5-minute pieces or 3-minute pieces connected to the song, the scripture, and the theme of the day.
In this particular service, John was using the book, The Second Half of Life, and had, I think it was 3 services we had on this book, and this was the second half day where you say yes. So you'll see the bulletin cover again. It says yes, yes, and yes. Yes and is what Second Half of Life is about. We use the story of the prodigal son, and I don't know if you can see that there, but the scripture had 3 songs interspersed with it. So we paraphrased the story and had the music sort of fit in the middle, which was part of the scripture story. And so there were 3 songs and 3 kind of readings, and it was a way to, we paraphrased it like it was modern, not so much from that time. And so it was a way to bring that prodigal son story into today with the music and the culture, and to really reinforce that idea that everybody gets into places where they're feeling lost, but that God is there to welcome them. So look for places in your worship where you can change things up a bit. We do have an order that's quite regular, but if you're looking for, it needs to be something to me in every service that's a bit different, that will catch people's attention. In this service, the band comes and plays and doing the scripture different. Lots of times we use video clips, particularly during Real Theology, or news clips that we've had. We talked on one service about a church in Claremont that had set up a nativity scene that welcomed LGBT people, like Jesus was born for all of us or something like that, and it was vandalized. Someone pushed it over and said it was horrible, they shouldn't have it in this community. And so we showed the news clip from the incident, and then that really brought it alive. Instead of just saying, oh, this happened in Claremont, there was the news clip right there. People saw that. We talked about the universe, and we had a clip of Stephen Hawking talking about the universe. Just like clips shouldn't be any more than about 3, if it's really good, 5 minutes long, but it illustrating the theme in some way is really good at getting people's minds focused on what you're really talking about. So we use video and stuff like that quite often.
So the thing I just want to conclude around the music piece is we'll do, so this Sunday we're doing Great is Thy Faithfulness as a piece, but we'll also have some far more contemporary music. Last week they did a piece. What was the pieces you did?
Sing. It was the Carpenters, Kermit the Frog, because we were talking about the Song of Faith actually last week. I can show you the bulletin from that service. So we were talking about the Song of Faith. So in my head, I'm like, oh, wow. Every time I think about singing, I think of that song, Sing, sing a song, sing out loud, which I'm sure you know, and I'd like to teach the world to sing. So we sang those songs during the offertory, and everybody knew them. And so we sang Amazing Grace to the tune of the House of the Rising Sun. And usually those contemporary songs, True Colors, we sang one week. Those are songs people know, and they really join in and really like bringing the music from their life into worship. We sing Christian songs too, songs from Voices United, but also when it fits, a song that people will know from culture. Really important.
So what do you use for music on those? We have, well, you can answer this.
Okay, we have a pianist who is very flexible in terms of his style. I try to put one song in that he'll play on the organ, because we do have a pipe organ that's 100 years old, and it's a beautiful instrument when it's played. So we like to use that. We have a band play along when we're doing contemporary music. So a guitar. We have an electronic drum set that we bought, because in a lot of churches drums just reverberate off the walls because they were built for acoustic. So drums are hard in that. So we bought actually an electronic set of drums that can be controlled on the soundboard. And so we have often a drummer and bass and guitar and some singers to lead the singing. This year we've gone completely away from thinking that the choir is going to lead congregational singing, particularly contemporary music. They can't do it, and they don't do it. So our leadership is by one or two voices or a small group. The choir still sings, and they sing along, but they weren't able to lead the singing. I think particularly because in this culture we're used to one voice songs. You don't learn how to sing in school anymore. People don't learn part singing. It's not part of their lives anymore. If they sing along to something, they hear one voice. So we've changed our music leadership to reflect that people need to hear one or two voices. They don't get leadership from a big group.
Okay. I read here, okay, I'm really lucky our choir is doing contemporary and traditional as well. Yeah, so music's key, a variety of music. And so that you're not pinned down, I think. One of the things I would say is we're not pinned down as a contemporary church only. We do whole variety of stuff, and just when people think they got us figured out, we do something different.
That's right.
I know we got about 10 minutes here, so I just want to say something about one of the things that somebody who's a former moderator in our church says, we take prayer quite seriously in our worship. And so that's really true. I get tired of being the guy at the front who had the magic words or the poetic words to do prayers. One Sunday I just said, okay, what do you want to pray about? And since then, what we've done is we're sort of there's 4 sections in the sanctuary. As we begin our prayers, we just ask people, what are the joys and concerns? This is not new, but it is people voicing who or what's on their mind. It sort of brings prayer into that consciousness sharing kind of thinking. There's also a refrain that we sing each week, or usually by season, I would say. So 5 or 6 times a year we change the theme, but so people name their joy or concern. We wrap it up in music. Then there is something I say. We try to give a good chunk. I'll say 2 minutes, which isn't very long, but of silence where there's nobody speaking, and it's really sacred silence. And so the prayers are, a good 10 minutes of our worship is prayers of the people. They are not like a checklist, which I go to most churches and it's like, oh yeah, they talked about this, 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 and this. As though you're walking through prayers that are, politically correct. They're what's going on, trusting that silence is probably the best prayer offered. And so we create that space for people. One of the things that's really important in our community is creating opportunities for people to do what I would call traditional would be testimonials or telling their story. If you go to our website, you'll see that at least once a month, sometimes twice, we have several opportunities for people from the congregation to speak. If I've asked 100 people to speak in this church, I wouldn't be surprised, and 99 of them say yes. So as an example, we did Song of Faith last week. I asked 2 people to speak. One is a scientist. I was told that the science is in this Song of Faith, so I had a professor at the university speak about what he thinks about it. It was brilliant. Someone told me afterwards what was really interesting is he spoke their language. As a scientist, he just talked their language, they got it. The other thing that about the Song of Faith was the sort of the inclusion of sexuality as clearly. And so a woman who happens to be an ordained United Methodist minister, I asked her to speak sort of the feminine voice of what she thought. But what I'm saying is that we ask people all the time to speak, anywhere from a minute to 3. They usually take, if you say 3, they're 5, but nonetheless, they're far better than anything that I, as the minister, could say, because they're people sitting in the pews saying what they think and believe and why. And they're truly the most wonderful testimonials. And those deepen community. They articulate what people who are sitting in the pews think. And we really need to recover that sense of testimonial as an aspect of worship. You'll see that we do it all the time on different topics, and the people are sitting right there. 9 out of 10 say yes.
That goes back to the whole digital versus literate culture, because digital culture is interested in story and your story. So the prayers that we give, for instance, people stand up and say, my mother is in her last days. And so people can go up after and they know something about the story of that person because of that. And then as well, so the prayers are story and people give their testimonies, that's their story as well. So it's not around what do you believe about God, for instance. That was William who spoke, he's the scientist, wasn't from a church at all. And he used to be anti-religion and happened into a church one Christmas Eve, and the minister was speaking was an engineer and spoke his language. And he is like the vice chair of our board now. And so his story about coming to faith is like way more powerful than anything you can read out of the Bible. Its story is so important, and encouraging your congregation to share their stories is an amazing way for people to feel like, oh, that person had an experience of God in their lives. I can too, or I do too, and to speak those things. It's very powerful.
So your question is, how do you engage them or encourage them to select a topic? So every week, I'm not sure what you're doing this Sunday, but every week you're doing a topic. And so you're just really thinking for yourself as the leader, who in the community could speak to this, whether it's Earth Day or whether it's honoring children or whether it's joining the church or whether it's any aspect of the life of the community. Your job as a leader, I would say, is to think who could articulate this, give them 1 or 2 questions, and just trust it. I never, almost never, read what they're going to say or edit it unless I'm concerned. But like I say, 9 out of 10 times I don't. Just give them the question you want them to answer, and they are brilliant. Brilliant.
Advent is a great time to do this. We almost always have people speak at Advent because you'll say, it's Hope Week. Where have you experienced hope in your life? And a person, and you say, like, have you got hope at home or hope in work or whatever? And if you know the stories of the people in your congregation, you know whose story is going to fit really well with that day. And so you do provide a framework for them to work within, because a lot of people are just afraid they wouldn't know what to say. And you give them a length. And then people, they never let you down. Their stories are always interesting.
Okay, so I'm just going to check it. We've got about 10 minutes, I think. Is that right? About 10 minutes left? Okay. If we can do 10, we'll be done. Okay, it says, thank you, and you do this 3 to 5 minutes. Yeah, I would say no more than 5, unless you're really going to say, we're I do, believe it or not, it's
I've got
20
about
minutes
5,
of sermon time,
but I think we can take a few
more. So if I was having
okay
other people speak, and I would say, I want you 5 minutes or 3 minutes.
Great.
But sometimes we'll say, we want 1 minute. We want you in 1 minute to say what's important to you and why. It's really, I guess the point is that you're engaging the community instead of the minister just talking. Not that what we say isn't important. I think it's very important. We model it lots, but the people in the pews have lots of good things to say. So this is
yeah, the question is, when you have limited time and resources, how do you make those kinds of change? I would go to our second service. We started something we call the 905 Express, which is a shorter service, and so we only sing twice in there. The message is the same. If people are speaking, they're still the same. You don't need resources to find someone in your community to speak their story. And so that's, if you know people in your community who can speak, that's great. It's hard to do contemporary music if your accompanist doesn't have a sense of rhythm. And I've been in churches where that's been the case. So if you can find a guitar player or someone in your congregation, a little younger, who can play contemporary music, that's also very helpful. It's not difficult to, if you don't have a screen, you can, it's not actually that expensive to get an LCD projector that hooks up to a computer to show clips. You can make a screen out of fabric and PVC if you don't have it in your church, or lots of churches just have screens somewhere. So you can put that up if you want to use that. It's actually not that expensive. Most people have a computer, can play clips. The LCD projectors are like, you can buy one for $500 now, so they're not overly expensive. Hopefully, if that's what you are hoping to do, that the church can find those resources. So there's lots of ways, but honestly, concentrate on story. Concentrate on story in your worship and in the stories of the people and the lives of the people. You can connect to culture without spending any money, just by saying, hey, this week's movie, I saw this movie and it said this, or this is a great book I'm reading. So you don't need bells and whistles. It's really a change in the way you view worship, more than adding stuff, adding the screen, getting a band, doing all these things. That doesn't change worship. That just changes the elements. Rearranging the way you think about worship to be thematic, to be story-oriented, that's new worship. That's worship that's different, that builds community. And that's the transition, we believe, that needs to be made.
Yeah, so on that, sort of the thing, when I was on sabbatical, I went and toured. I gave up the United Church for 3 months, and I went and toured other denominations. And what struck me was how boring church was, how long bulletins were, how little people expected. I couldn't believe people were sitting there. Even if the sermon was fantastic, you had to sit there for an hour before you got to the sermon. And it's really important I think the thing I think about is, do we really believe this? Do we really believe God is alive among us? What's really important? And how are we going to get at that so that we can touch that, feel that, know that? And I think that's really key to think about as leaders. Do I really believe in God, and what does God look like, and how can I help other people see what that looks like? A lot of ministers, it's a good question. Do you believe in God really or not? And how are you going to make worship express that fact or that hope? Or if you're having a bad time, as I had in the fall, I had a Sunday where I just said, we're supposed to talk about being connected to the sacred. So I don't feel that right now. Mm-hmm. And I just talked about what it was like to be disconnected. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing to me. People, I did say to them, don't come and hug me. I don't need anything from you. But how the email trail of people who said, you know what, thanks for saying that, because I don't feel connected to God either. Or I'm going through a tough time too. Or I'm not connected to God, so I don't know what that means. So I'm just saying that I think we have to be really real with our people and not play church or pretend. Mm-hmm. And if we're not feeling it, say it. But I do think that there's lots of people in the pews who really inspire my journey by their sharing of what they believe.
It's really important to speak the truth.
So
it's not fake.
We're going to try to wrap up in some sense. One of the things we do that's really important is create rituals. What's the response? People want to respond, so we try to create opportunities for people in worship to actually respond to what's happened. We don't do it all the time, but when we do, when we're intentional about it, Whether that's so our Good Friday service, we had lots of opportunity for ritual, whether it was nailing or pouring of tears or writing our fears, or people being handed a candle or a small backpack, or being invited to respond. I think people really want to respond in worship in some way, and so we try to be intentional about, is there something they could do that would ritualize what's taken place in that worship. We do the Sunday before we do communion, as an example, we always, once a month, for the prayers, we don't say anything. We just have dough and at 3 or 4 stations in the church, and we invite people to knead their prayers into the bread. The bread's baked, and we just break it the next week. But that ritual of kneading the bread is really exciting for people who I never thought would participate. Elderly people in particular love that kneading of the bread, and that becomes part of their worship experience. So we have to think of ways in which we can invite people to do something as a response. So the last sort of thing I would want to say around it is we did this worship experience, and we were getting full. So we were at 110% in the fall, and so we decided we had to split and create 2 worship services. So now we have a service at 9:05 in the morning. People who come to that, a shorter service, it's about 45 minutes. It's a shorter service, it's early in the morning, it's a bit quieter, although the sermon part is the same. The music is a little bit different, but what we found is people who had met the needs of young nursing mothers, as an example, who are people who are trying to work around naps. So we were trying to create space for them. Our first Sunday we did it. We had 70 people came to that service, and we're about 70 to 80 on the last 6 weeks that we've been doing it. The second service is a fuller crowd, so there would be 250, say, at that, and it's got all the bells and whistles and music, etc., etc. It's higher energy. There's always lunch after worship every week. And that's really key. Every week. I did not start this. When I got here, there were 38 people. They had lunch together after church. They still, generally, we're about 150 people stay for lunch. They eat together every week. And that is that's as much a part of what goes on in the hour of worship as anything. People stay, and it's organized in a way that's part of it. Once is potluck. Once we actually have hired somebody to help us serve lunch. And then the other 2 Sundays, people come together as families to serve food. Eating together and worship is essential.
Right.
That is the life of this church. So that from the beginning, whether it's coffee, to the very end, people staying for lunch, the eating and drinking is profound 2,000-year-old history or more, probably 3,000 or 4,000 years, and it's still alive and well. And that chance to eat together after worship is really astounding. The connections that are made, the community that's created, and that is not like a once every 6 months we'll have a potluck lunch. It's every week we do it. Okay, so that lunch thing is I don't know any other church that does that. I did not create it, just expanded what was already there. So the sum of it, form and function. Just say something about that in last questions, I guess.
Yeah, it's just the thing about worship is there's a lot of churches they're stuck in a particular form of doing things, of seeing things, and so you got to switch from that to function, to say, how can we make this more accessible? How can we make this rearrange what we have to flow better? And to think more about how you're going to accomplish this, and free yourself from the way things are or have to be. Let go of those things first and concentrate on what you really want to say. What are the needs of this community? And how can we meet those needs in our worship? How can we touch people? How can people be transformed? How can they know that the Spirit is with them and in their lives? Those are the things that are important about worship. Not singing holy, 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 not having responsive prayers, not making sure you have the 3 scriptures, not making sure that the pulpit and the 3 chairs are nicely placed up there and the flowers are exactly right. That's not church, that's not worship. What is it that people need to hear today to know that God is present? Make that the foundation, and then build from there.
I would want to just conclude by saying the thing that when I got at this church, there were 38 people. There were 30 that were elderly and 8 that weren't. And I worked with the 8, I'll say, to sit, and with the 30, but to say the church isn't about us, it's about the future. Who's not here? It's not about me, but it's about faithful living means the church exists beyond my lifetime. And I think that was the convincing thing for lots of the elderly people who were here, recognizing that it's not about them. And I think churches get stuck when they think it's just about those of us who are here. And so you have to really cultivate and create a spirit of hospitality where people who aren't like me are welcome. So I don't know if anybody's got a question, but I think we hit your time.
Well, we'll just wait a minute to see if anyone has a last-minute question or comment, but I just wanted to thank you so much. I find this really exciting and encouraging, and I hope that we can get the word out there, and perhaps we can encourage some other people to watch the recording, because I think this has been truly helpful. I wanted to make a comment as well. We talked a few minutes ago about resources, and I would just encourage people in this webinar today to look at the resources in your community and what can be done. And often God places particular people with gifts and talents in our midst, and what can we do with that? It's a danger when smaller churches try to emulate bigger churches and they don't have the capacity or the resources to sustain the kind of worship and multimedia experience that Willow Creek, for example, being multiple thousands membership church is able to do. But what can we do that's inspiring and reaches out to those beyond our walls, as you say? So we look very forward to having you again with us next week on the topic of leadership, and then the week after on culture. I was able to get a hold of our technician at the beginning of this webinar, so we will have the recorded version available for your Saturday event, Bob and Myrna, so that's good news. I think that your group will find this very hopeful and helpful as well.
If you're able to collect them, that would be great, because I would want to
that if you had any questions
know what some of your
on the
leadership
topic of
questions are to
leadership
make
coming
sure I
up,
address
or
them
perhaps
if
even
possible.
something from
the question
this
at the bottom
webinar
here, is
today.
there a resource or video
John, what do you think
to
if we
complement
collect
what
those,
you've
given
shared?
it's a small group? If
No,
you have something particular
there really
that
isn't,
you'd like to see answered or
but
addressed next week, perhaps we could
I really,
try and incorporate that.
we don't use, we're terrible
How does that
at
sound,
this.
John?
We don't use a lot of, we can't point you to go do what they do or this particular resource. A lot of it has emerged from where we are. That's not to say we haven't used, so as an example, we did use the 7 Deadly Sins came from a book, or Phoenix Affirmations.
That was Eric Elness had put together the resource 7 Deadly Sins, which we modified significantly, but he provided, it's a lot of background information, so he did that. I have done a lot of reading over the years. I actually think Tom Bandy's book, Kicking Habits, is a great book to start. It really opened my eyes up. It probably was 15, 20 years ago that he wrote that, about what's happening in churches and how we have to change. So that's a good resource for understanding. And other than that, like, I also read The Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren. He's a conservative, but really helpful in understanding, like, who's your audience and, what are you about. So that's actually a good resource to read, recognizing that his message is more conservative, but it still talks about church very well. And from that, we kind of say we're trying to lay track here. We don't want to copy anyone. We want to know what's in our community and try to meet the needs. of the people who are in the pews. And that's what you can't copy a church. Churches don't copy well because communities are unique.
It's a really important piece. Okay.